I would go back to the point that was made that your morals must inform your actions throughout your life. And if you're in public life, whether it's elected, appointed, or any other public position, then one would hope and expect that you would be guided by your moral principles rather than not guided by your moral principles. So I think it's almost a given. If you go to the founding documents and the founding fathers and so forth, it is almost a given that you in politics and government will have a moral basis, and you will adhere to that moral basis, and that's the reason why you can be trusted to some degree. Coming off of the Sebelius versus the Little Sisters case, Little Sisters of the Poor, I think in that case we see the arm of the government insisting, despite having given accommodations elsewhere, that their accommodation that the government says is sufficient must be sufficient, and it went all the way to the Supreme Court, and they're still at that. I think that's precisely to the point of what is it that you are not allowed to do with your religion because the state says you must.
And your conclusion would be that the state has no authority or some authority?
Well, I think we live in one of the wonderful things about our country is freedom of religion, and I applaud everybody's point that we should have freedom of religion to hold and espouse our views and to disagree amicably with each other, and that in fact if we're going to be true evangelists of religion, we must provide reasons for people to see our point of view and to be, we hope we're spreading the faith, and we do that through example and through reason and so forth. That's the only way things really work. But at the same time, we have another thing that makes America unique and great is we have limited government. We are based on, government is not unlimited, it is limited, and the limits are clearly drawn. And now those limits are becoming very fuzzy, blurry, and now that we have government involved in so much of our lives, it is reaching to the edges where it's overstepping. And so we say, well, you can't really do that. And you say, well, why not? I mean, if everybody else has to, you must too. Does that impinge on the freedom of religion? I think so. Does that defeat our whole idea of having a limited government? I think so. Is this a serious problem that we're addressing this evening? I think so. At what point does the government tell you that your religion must bend? You know, your sincerely held belief, your religion, you must bend. And I'm not saying there isn't a point, but what is that point? And if it comes down to providing normal services, I think there's no problem with that, although I think we're stretching to some degree the interstate commerce clause and all that went that way, because there is still, I believe you have your own business. You can make your own rules. No hat, no shirt, no service, no shoes, no service. On the other hand, we have it pretty widely, if you're in interstate commerce or if you're largely a public accommodation, you need to accommodate all. But when it is interpreted, and reasonably so, that the demand is that the state is enforcing that you will participate in a celebration of something that you find to be not only unchristian, but in fact described as quite a bit less than that, and in fact you see as being a mock of marriage. But you will be forced to participate in that celebration, or you will pay with everything you have, potentially, if you do not. Now, did I overstate that? and whose rights are going to have priority. Somebody who wants a photographer to in fact come and do all of this, put all of his or her artistic capability at the disposal of the groom and groom or the bride and bride. Where do we stop? And when was the last time we had any problems with an Islamic baker or photographer or florist? We haven't had one. Interesting that. I'm just waiting to see that happen, to bring the last couple things we've been talking about together. But right now the question is, we have Christians who have been stripped of their livelihood for refusal to celebrate, to participate in a celebration of what they consider to be a mock of marriage.
Yeah.
If I could just respond very briefly.
Sure.
Your point is that you'd find it very difficult as to where to draw the line.
As to what?
Where to draw the line. I started off with that. It's very difficult as to where to draw the line, but at some point you have to draw the line. And if it's you and your wife are providing wedding services and doing dresses, and you don't want to provide a dress for the groom and groom, should you be forced to do that?
Well, again, I would say yes. I would say that this is a basic, you're providing a good and service to another human being, and that would look to me much more like civil rights issues. And I think the same argument might have been made in the 1950s about why I wouldn't serve African American people or whatever, even though the issue is a different issue. I think now when it comes to a religious person officiating at a ceremony, I think that's a different issue altogether.
So the faith does not imbue your entire life.
It does. My faith imbues every part of my life.
Well, but mine shouldn't.
No, I'm actually not saying it shouldn't. I'm just saying that you're providing a good or service. So where do you draw the line on that? I mean, I'm not going to teach you because you're a gay kid, because I don't believe in homosexuality. I think it's a sin, so I need you to say
And now you're trying to draw the line, which is a good thing. And I think that discussion is healthy and needs to be had. But when you're getting into very personal services and you're getting into what I would characterize as being participating in the celebration of what they see as being a mock of a sacrament. You know, what happens if you have a couple of people, let's get off the gay thing for a little bit, what happens if you have a couple of people who are Satanists and they want you to participate in their Satanistic ritual? And there are those. And you would say, well, you can't discriminate against a Satanist.
I would say that if I'm a cake baker, I'm baking cakes for people.
You make a cake, they would say, "Hail Satan"?
I probably would not put that on the cake. You're right. There would be a limit. You're exactly right. I would have a certain point where I'd say I'm not. Yeah.
It's a difficult line to draw, but I think it needs to be drawn.
Well, and I'm happy to say that in Georgia there was a religious freedom bill, as you probably know. It was vetoed by Governor Deal, Republican, Southern Baptist governor. One of the reasons for that is partly his own theology and the long tradition that Southern Baptists have of supporting both religious freedom but also non-discrimination. That bill had tipped the balance and was going to discriminate. There are no civil rights laws in Georgia, ironically, the state that I'm from. And I'm happy to say there were 500 clergy opposing that bill, many of whom were conservative. And they did it because it would have denigrated religious freedom to do it. And just to be clear, no one is asking pastors to perform gay weddings if that's not something they believe in. And I would defend any pastor's right to stand by that. At the same time, when we do enter into the public square, whether it's providing housing, whether it's providing some sort of commercial service, we have to respect every person. And as Christians, that's a deeply theological belief. It's also a democratic belief. So it's how our government should function in a democracy where we honor different perspectives and we honor pluralism. At the same time, it is a deeply held Christian belief that we treat every person with human dignity and respect.
I think you can, you must, and you should. Let me reverse that. You should and you must. Love the sinner. Particularly the sinner. However, you must also hate the sin, and you cannot be forced to be complicit in what you see as sin. And that is where the point is. The rest of it is beside the point. The point is, should somebody who refuses to participate in what they see as sin, to cooperate with that, should they be forced to do so on pain, as your fact checker will tell us, of losing their livelihood? Or should they lose their job? Should a person who is a preacher on Sunday lose his job on Monday because in his preaching he preaches something similar to what we're speaking of today? Should a public servant lose his position because he publishes a Christian tract, a Christian booklet? And I give you Dr. Eric Walsh, who is the head of the Georgia Department of Public Health, who was fired from his job for preaching on Sunday what they didn't like. And that happened on May 16, 2014. And I give you Kelvin Cochran, who published a faith-based book, and he was an Atlanta fire chief who was fired on 6 January 2015, both African-American Christians in Georgia. And this is the toleration that we're in favor of. I would like to point out that, one, we haven't heard from the fact checker, but I take that as good news. No news is good news. And two, while nobody really seems anxious to go ahead and say that the state shouldn't force somebody to do something along the line of what we were discussing, everybody on the stage here, except for you and I, have exempted themselves from having to do that because clergy should not in any way. But yet others who hold those beliefs and hold their actions to be important, well, we kind of cut them loose. And I think that is kind of an inconsistency that needs to be thought about a little bit more.
I don't want you to think that was not what I was saying. I was saying that I agreed with Reverend Hamilton that traditions or faith traditions could not be forced to necessarily do that. That was not to say what I would not do. All right, because I'm very much for embracing the community.
I understand, but the thing is that, Pastor, what you're saying is that the clergy must be exempt, but everybody else, well, that's kind of, they're on their own.
Yeah.
And they can be just as intense in trying to live their faith life. And they can see things just as importantly there as well. Your points are well taken. I appreciate them, and I think the point was already made that while you say a creation of God, which is obviously true, and we're all sinners, the fact of the matter is that we must love the individual. We must love the individual, no matter who the individual is, no matter what the individual has done. Absolutely. And that's the example that Christ gave us. And so we must do that. On the other hand, what should we not do, and what else must we do? There's more to it than that. So I appreciate the conversation. I very much appreciate the different points of view, and I certainly agree that more such conversation is absolutely needed, because we are a country of the people. We are the people who run this country, really. We are the rulers. You don't believe it? Come back in November. We're the rulers, and if we're not taking that seriously enough to become informed and to open an aperture wide enough to take in various different points of view, then we're very frankly negligent in our duties, and it's very important that we do that.
Thank you.